Welcome back to the Permissionless podcast, brought to you by, of course, the team at Guardian. And as always, on the Permissionless podcast here, we're going deep with DeFi protocols who are building something exciting on the edge of DeFi. And we've got the promise of something new and interesting today, of course, with Cork protocol. So in this conversation with Rob from Cork, we got to go deep on, first of all, how he even found his way into DeFi, what his journey was, and how he saw the opportunity that they're going after today with Cork protocol, which is addressing the risk of DPEGs, of stablecoins, of LRT tokens, and really creating the protocol to assess risk in a 24/7 market in crypto. So we discussed everything from how risk is underwritten to the actual functionalities of Cork protocol to really how we think that this sort of a feedback loop and measurement can be leveraged and actually help institutions be able to underwrite things and come into the space with the right tools at their disposal. But of course, we will go much, much deeper on all of those things in just a second. My name is Owen, and over 3.5 years ago, I founded Guardian, and we started out on the premise that DeFi would house trillions of dollars of assets in TVL, and we knew that security just had to have a stepwise level of increase to be able to ship confidently in that environment. And today I'm happy to say that we have achieved the standard necessary with not just one, but two distinct auditing teams on every engagement, accompanied by a world-renowned lead researcher and a full-time dedicated engineer fuzzing the contracts and the scope to uncover even the most mind-numbing of edge cases. And we've battle hardened this model so much so that we're actually able to put up our own funds as a bounty on the contracts. And so really at this point, it is up to DeFi to catch up. We are ready to handle the masses. But of course, now without further ado, let us get into this wonderful conversation with Rob from Cork. Well, yeah, I mean, once again, Robert, thanks for taking the time to join us, and really interested to hear more about what you guys are building at Cork and all of the integrations that you guys are supporting for different types of DPEG risk, and then of course what kind of risk you guys can get into in the future if you're interested in that. But yeah, I mean, really before we get into all of that stuff, I feel like there's so much to cover on that side, but I'd love to hear, how did you find your way into DeFi first, like personally? Like, how did you find your way here?
Thanks for having me. Really excited for this conversation. My initial journey into DeFi was initially colored by like traditional finance. Like I was
Yep.
personally very into like stocks, and I got a bit into like some like derivatives, like options and so forth. This was in like probably from the 2016 to like 2019 like
Yep.
period. I had like during that period like heard like peripherally of crypto, especially during the like sort of ICO boom, but I really didn't like get into it myself. Like I was at the time busy building my first company and just was super focused on that. But on my spare time, I got really into like investing, and then I initially heard of like Bitcoin. Like that was like the thing I first got into. I got introduced. Like I was making some like payments using Bitcoin, and then I heard about Ethereum on like Lex podcast, and then I just like got like obsessed. Like it was like a month or so where it's just like all my evenings I was just like looking into Ethereum, and I was super excited about the ecosystems. This was in sort of the late like 2019 period, and for me that was a very exciting time because there was all these things going on, but it was super like unknown. Like like ETH was like not a known asset. Like the whole ecosystem was really just builders that were like there for the long term because it was like middle of the bear market,
Yep.
and I really enjoyed the vibes. For me, like the space resonated with me on a lot of levels. I think in particular, this sort of I have some like libertarian like kind of core beliefs, and I think this idea of just being able to build this like permissionless like financial system that is outside of like anyone's control, that can't
Yeah.
be stopped. To me, that was like super exciting, and so I really wanted to get into it. Like I was really active in like DeFi summer, and like I really wanted to find something to work in DeFi, and that's initially how I got into working in crypto. Was became one of the co-founders of Toucan protocol, which is working with tokenization of carbon assets.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. It's very like addicting once you start to realize you start to pull a little thread and then you realize like how much is actually there in Ethereum. You realize it's not actually all smoke and mirrors. It's not all about price. There's actually some like cool tech underlying with some really good compounding effects. Like you mentioned, with like infinite composability across everything on the blockchain, which is um, a really great thing to have on your side. But yeah, I mean, I totally relate with so like seeing like a random podcast. Did you watch like was it like the Vitalik on Lex Friedman?
Yeah, exactly. It was Vitalik and
Yeah.
Lex. That's
Nice. I'm pretty sure I watched like the same one, and then and that also kind of onboarded me to the space as well. Yeah, and then I mean,
oh,
it's like you start reading Mastering Ethereum, and then it's like you're hooked. You're like you'll never go back. But
yeah, exactly.
yeah, dude, it's great to hear. I love to just hear about how everybody sort of found their way in and just kind of stumbled across it. Everybody's got their own like circuitous path. And then, so you get into DeFi and it's during DeFi summer. Are you using some of the applications? Are you participating in some of those like crazy like protocol launches? What does that look like initially for you?
Yeah. I initially I started being a contributor to some like DAOs.
Yeah.
So I was a bit involved in like Tracer DAO, which is building sort of composable like options, and then also Index Co-op, which was doing
Yep.
like index products. I was still doing that.
Yep.
And so I sort of started like trying to contribute in those communities, and then I was starting to use some of the kind of new like yield farms and so forth. Like
Yeah.
I was using Alchemix a fair bit and doing a lot of farming there. There was also some of the like Ohm forks. Like there was one
Yeah.
in particular Ohm fork called Klima that was built on top of
No
Toucan,
doubt.
which I ended
Yeah.
up founding. And yeah, that was a whole
Rough price
uh,
action on that one.
yeah, it had it was a crazy rise and fall of that
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
ecosystem. But yeah, so I was quite actively involved. I mean, I had limited time, so it's not like I could spend like all my time kind of doing
Yeah.
these things. But you know, as much time as I could, I was kind of like it was basically all my like weekends at like late
Yeah.
nights was like just DeFi.
Yeah, I feel like it's all kind of well, first of all, I think we all have the moment where we just lose a ton of money on DeFi protocols, and that's like kind of the cost of entry. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely like on the weekends, you finish up maybe, whatever. For me, I was like a remote like software engineer at the time, so it was like great to just go and like play with these DeFi applications and stuff like this. Um, and of course watch all the ohm forks and like get in the discords. I think the discords were a massive contributor to this sense of like community and feeling like there's actually people there who are also like interested in this stuff, and they're all like especially with like index co-op like you were a contributor to as well. And then what is it that got you to make the switch from full time outside of Web3? What got you to go full time on onto Web3?
Yeah, so my first company was at the time we had just sort of closed some initial like funding that was going to lead us towards doing an IPO. So we were kind of on this like in Sweden, like I saw from Sweden, and in Sweden we have these like early stage IPOs you can do, and we had
Yeah.
like raised money from investors that were kind of leading us in that direction. And so I was going through that process, and I was not really that excited about like actually taking the step of being like a public company CEO, because there was a very large amount of like burdens of like regulation and things you had to like just comply with on so many
Yeah.
levels. And so that was happening like on the one side. And then on the other side, I like was writing like some blog posts tied to I have a blog, and I wrote some posts tied to in particular the sustainability profile of like Ethereum and the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah.
And as a part of that, I got in touch with like the early founding team at Toucan, and then I ended up joining them basically. And initially, I was doing this in parallel with my like past job. It was kind of I
Yeah.
was just contributing, but then that became like Toucan took off and um, that whole thing just started taking up more and more of my like attention, and I ended up joining them as like a part of the founding team. And so those things were happening in parallel. And so I ended up leaving one and jumping to the other.
Yeah.
And so my previous company was in sustainability. And that was like, for me, the challenge I had with DeFi was like, I didn't want to do something that was just a pure play, like, finance play. That was just another, like, another toy in the casino. I wanted to do something that kind of to me felt meaningful. And for me, that's always been important to me as, like I spend most of my time like with work, and so I want the work I'm doing to be something that's impactful. And
Yeah.
so Toucan was for me that perfect synergy because it was working with carbon markets, which I had worked with a bit in my past company, and it was like tied to sustainability, and so yeah, that was really exciting, and that made me kind of make a jump. And since then, like I was really considering after I left Toucan, I was considering if I should like work in like Web2 or do something else, and honestly, it's like pretty like working in crypto is pretty addictive. It's pretty it's quite hard to go back to doing something else after because there's like a lot of aspects of working in crypto that are just for better or worse. Like it has its own really specific nature and it really appeals to me. So I'm happy I'm still here and I'll probably be around for a good while longer.
Awesome. Yeah. And so from Toucan, obviously, you founded Cork. I guess one thing that we're curious about is like what led to, you picking that as the next thing. How'd you come up with the idea? Were there any events or things you saw in DeFi that kind of influenced that decision to start what you're working on now?
Yeah, so at Toucan, I was leading, amongst other things, I was leading the sort of tokenomics work. So doing all the like market design and all these types of things. And we had looked a lot at mortgage-backed securities because what we were doing was like functionally quite similar to a mortgage-backed security where you had all these sort of semi-fungible assets that you want to like package up into one kind of package to make it more liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And so from a market structure perspective, it had like some similarities. And so I looked quite deeply at that. And so when I eventually left Toucan, I went on like a sabbatical and like was exploring lots of different ideas. And one of them I went pretty deep into was mortgage-backed securities. I then decided that the timing was not quite right to build a project because the project I was going to build was kind of trying to do like on-chain mortgage-backed securities or like that type of structured finance. But like tied to that type of structured finance, you have like credit default swaps, which is I would say in the same category and is very intrinsically linked to mortgage-backed securities. And so that was like one source of inspiration. And then the other side of it was I was writing again like a blog post. It's all starts with a blog post for me. I was writing a blog post specifically on the liquidity profile of like liquid staking tokens and how they're being like rehypothecated and what would happen in a black swan event if you would have basically like some sort of like big systemic outflow or like some sort of like massive depeg and like what would be like the cascading effects across the ecosystem, like how long could a like withdrawal queue get and like what would that mean for other projects? Because this was in particular in response to Blast was really taking off at the time. So this was like late 2023. And I was kind of getting a bit concerned that we hadn't really like internalized some of the lessons from the last cycle when we had like the Terra Luna depeg and like that whole crash resulted in like 3 hours capital kind of going under and then that led to like Genesis and like a lot of other like compounding effects from that that eventually led to like FTX. I mean FTX probably would have collapsed at some point anyways, but it really contributed a lot to that. And so I was kind of like getting worried that okay, we're repeating the same mistakes. And I was thinking about like how can we create something that helps like resolve that? Like basically create some sort of like way. I mean, initially it was like some sort of buffer of liquidity that could help people to like get out if there's a depeg. And if you have a depeg that's where it's primarily time risk, like which it would be in a sort of like LST type depeg, like how you could like design a mechanism around that. So that was the initial design, and then that evolved into basically becoming like a protocol to like tokenize risk. And now I'd say the core idea and like where this evolved to is like all these types of instruments that are where you have like a pegged asset that's in particular earning yield is in a sense, in our view, very similar to a credit instrument. It has very similar risks as you have in credit risk. And you basically need a way to hedge and price credit risk in the system. And so in our view, it's like roughly 300 like billion or so like pegged assets. It's like in a sense 300 billion of like credit that now we think it's important to like as this really wants to mature and reach like mainstream large scale institutions, we need a way to like understand price this risk and be able to hedge it and create like risk management infrastructure around it. And that's ultimately what Cork, in my opinion, is hoping to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as a user profile, do you see this as something where, you know, if you're a user of these assets, maybe you go on Cork and kind of hedge any potential risk as a user? Or is it also like if you're speculating and maybe not involved in those assets and you think there might be potential risks, you can interact with the market in that way?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think there's multiple use cases, and I think they're in a sense quite synergistic to each other because what you want is people to basically trade both sides of the risk. Like you want people to like have a risk pricing, and if the price goes above or beyond what they think the risk price should be, they will take that side. And so, for example, if we take the Terra Luna example again, like I personally had done like a fair bit of like due diligence on Terra Luna, and I was really worried it was going to collapse. Like I was telling all my friends, like this is very unsustainable, and the liquidity profile, like if there would be a mass flow of like redemptions, it would like all crash. But I didn't have a way to express that view, and I was not the only one with that view. Like there was lots of people in the ecosystem, in particular in the Ethereum ecosystem, that was deeply skeptical of Terra Luna and its design. And I think it would be very useful for the space if there was a tool and a mechanism for them to basically say, look, like we can take this side of the bet. That would probably push up the risk pricing, and that would show the market that like, look, there's like all this capital that's basically saying like this is like super risky. And I think that's it's a signal to the rest of the market. It's in the same way that when credit default swap like rates spike like off chain, that tells you something about the like likelihood of like defaults in the market and likelihood of like a recession and so forth, as we're seeing like right now with credit default swap rates kind of spiking off chain. I think you could see something similar on chain, and so I think it could have been useful there. And so I think that's definitely one angle that's interesting. I mean, the other like probably more traditional angle is just you want to hedge, and I think that's probably likely where the biggest like pocket of demand for this sits, is like especially like institutions that have exposure to these assets, they need to manage their risk. This is like it's pretty challenging to currently manage your risk in DeFi, and there's just not a lot of tooling available. So I think this introduces like a net new like primitive that allows you to do that. And then there's like whole composability of it. So you can integrate it into lots of different things. So like, I think in particular things like looping trades, and we actually talk more about this, but for example, like the way you're doing looping trades today, like instead of hard coding oracles, I think we should just hedge the collateral, and then you like achieve the same thing, like of volatility protection. So yeah, there are lots of different use cases and ways you can use it, but definitely speculation is, I think, going to be an important driver.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to something you said a bit earlier, there's like almost this game theory element of like by creating this market, you all of a sudden like reveal a signal to everybody else, which is definitely super important. But yeah, I guess going more to like how things work under the hood, how do you figure out pricing and like factoring risk and like what ultimately ends up to be what the user sees when they, invest in the protocol?
Yeah, so I would say to answer that, you probably need to like understand a little bit the mechanisms of like how the protocol works. And so in particular, how it works is that we have something called the peg stability module, and it's written on a specific asset pair. So if we take, if we take like one of our markets as an example, which is like ETH to like staked ETH from Lido. So what happens is that you send ETH into the peg stability module, and it mints two tokens. And these two tokens represent basically two sides of a trade. So one is the DPEG swap, and the DPEG swap allows you to swap staked ETH 1-for-1 for ETH in the peg stability module. And then the other side is the cover token, which basically gets whatever's left at the expiry in the peg stability module. So it will either get back the original ETH if there was no DPEG, or if there was a lot of redemptions due to a DPEG or some other reason, it will get back staked ETH. And so the cover token holder basically underwrites the risk. and it's earning a yield by selling the DPEG swaps. And so the price of the DPEG swap basically becomes the price of the risk. And so that's, to answer your question, it's basically the price at which you can buy the DPEG swaps determines the yield that the cover token holder is getting, and determines basically the amount you need to pay for kind of continuous coverage on your position.
Yeah, to me, it's almost like what you guys have done is like separate out all of the different actors and incentives that need to exist for insurance to happen on chain. That's like the way that I see it. And obviously the insurance business is very much based on the float. Like they make money on investing the float of capital. Do you guys also do any kind of like rehypothecation where like let's say I provide liquidity, I get some cover tokens, and then on top of the premiums that are paid to me, is there any like strategies that I can put my capital in the meantime, or what does that look like?
Currently, the way we have dealt with that, and in particular, like the sort of relative capital efficiency of locking up this collateral is we accept also like yield bearing collateral. So, for
Yeah.
example, our market with EtherFi is wrapped state ETH from Lido,
Hmm.
and it's written against EtherFi ETH. So then, you're basically earning the risk premium of selling this coverage in addition to the like staking yield from Lido. So
Yeah.
that's like one way you can achieve this. I would say like we're kind of in the middle of so like finalizing our spec for our V2, and I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of things we can do, like without going into like all the specific details, but there's a lot of things we can do in terms of creating like much more capital efficient system by
Yeah.
covering specific parts of the DPEG range. Because
Mm,
currently we're basically you have a coverage for like the full range of DPEG. Like
yeah.
you can even if it goes to
1%
zero, you're
year-over-year.
fully covered.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think most of these markets end up the actual risk that's playing out is probably the first 10
Yeah.
to 20%. And most of the use cases also in terms of like hedging this for like looping trades, etc., is probably you're talking about the first 10, 20% that's relevant. And
Yeah.
so, there you can have like a 5-10x improvement in capital efficiency if you can like, program it to be covering a specific range. So that's coming
Yeah.
in
That
our
makes a lot of
V2.
sense. And that's pretty exciting. And I think you guys already have some kind of a Uniswap V4 hook or something like this. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So actually, we can support rehypothecation in the hook as well.
Yeah.
So that's like for example, there's some other hooks that support rehypothecation, but yeah, we're using Uniswap before, which is because the way our market works is that we have it's from a market structure perspective quite similar to Pendle in that we have both like we have a market between the cover token, so like this underwriter token, and then this like redemption asset that acts as collateral. And because of how the peg stability module works, we can create these basically synthetic swaps that
Yeah.
where you basically mint the two tokens and you sell back the one you don't need. And so that makes it so that you can have a market for both the cover token and the DPEG swap in one AMM, which basically concentrates like liquidity quite a bit. And you can yeah, anyway, so we built this using Uni 4, and Uni 4 enables us basically to customize quite a lot of things. So because we have expiring tokens, we need some customizability also in terms of, for example, the fee schedules so that they reduce towards expiry, and
Yeah.
also kind of there's some things around this like flash loss mechanism or like doing flash loans and doing it for free that we can do with Uni 4.
Yeah.
And then in general, like we have a curve, like a liquidity curve is gradually concentrating liquidity as you get closer to expiry. And that's also something
Yeah.
we built with Uni before. So yeah, the Uniswap team is awesome. Like we like
Yeah.
I'm really excited for Uni 4. I think it's still kind of in its infancy. It's like it has some
Yeah.
traction, but it's still kind of quite early. But I think this like model of creating like a toolkit and enabling people to kind of innovate with it, I think is really exciting. So yeah, we're pretty happy to be built on in that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think V4 it will be sort of a slow build up, but it will become like extremely compounding and it will start to have just an unimaginable amount of like utility out of it because you've got to think, okay, so they released V4. I mean, V4 just went live like I mean really just I think like a couple of months ago. And now all the teams, like the beauty of V4 is the integration level, right? And now all the teams, and we've started working with a few of them who are bringing some V4 hook stuff to market. You know, you can have like limit orders, you can have um, like another team that we actually just started working with this week is they're building like, you know, fixed rates for like floating rate, you know, markets on like Aave and stuff like this, right? So all this stuff that you can build, that stuff's going to take like, you know how long it takes to take a DeFi product to market. And of course, Uniswap V4, I will say one thing about it is it's the hardest yet to integrate with. Like there's, you know,
Yeah.
all this transient storage management and, you know, you've got to unlock and implement the callbacks and you got to make sure to pay down the exact deltas and all this stuff, which, you know, has its trade-offs, but uh, it'll take some time, but I definitely agree. I think like give it time, the compounding effect of having all these integrations and all these teams building on top of Uni V4 will be like pretty impressive. And I think it's kind of like that's kind of a microcosm of DeFi as a whole, because DeFi as a whole is the same thing. Anybody can come in permissionlessly, build on top, and integrate with all these primitives like Aave and you know like what have you, and maybe even like a Cork, something like this, if they want to maybe spin up like their own insurance market or something like this in the future. You know, this is where DeFi has its edge over the traditional markets. Um, but yeah, I mean, also just going back to what you were saying with like Luna, I mean, what better of a validation for this product than like people, if I remember correctly, people were literally making bespoke bets on Twitter and saying like, I'll bet you like $1 million that this will not be a dollar in 1 year. Um, and yeah, so I mean, what a great like validation for like, hey, this people want to use a product like this. And then I remember also, I think the USDC DPEG was also around that
Yeah.
time. Is that right? Did that also sort of like influence how you guys were thinking about this?
Yeah, I was personally, I mean, just kind of like looking back on what you were saying with like uniform composability, like I think that's totally right, and I think that's really the superpower of like the whole space, and
Yeah.
also I think when we think about what we're building, it's really trying to build a composable building block,
Yep.
and if we can unlock this new primitive of kind of like risk management and insurance and have it be
Absolutely.
like composable and programmable, I think that opens up like whole new design spaces of things you can do. And I think that, the compounding effect of there being like thousands and thousands of teams doing this is like
Yep.
really, I think, why the space is kind of winning. But yeah, I mean, to what you're saying with like USDC and like Terra Luna, the bespoke bets, like yeah, I was personally with UCC, I was really heavily affected by that because I had
Yeah.
like a pretty meaningful amount of my like
Yeah.
personal savings were in UCC, and at Toucan, basically almost our entire treasury was in UCC. And I have a very visceral memory of this weekend where it depegged because it depegged over a weekend.
Yeah.
I believe it was like it started like on a like Friday night in like European time, and
Yeah.
then the peak was like on a Saturday morning, I think,
Yep.
and it was just like pure panic because like
Yeah.
we didn't really know what to do, if the right thing to do was to like try to get out of this or to just sit it out because it was just
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
straight down. And before it reaches the bottom, I mean, like our entire like we have to spend this money to like pay people. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we didn't like sit on like a massive cushion, and we had all these like liabilities that were like tied to this money, and so that was super scary. So we were like frantically trying to figure out how to perform redemptions, and
Hmm.
like I set up like a circle account, but like I needed to do it with
Yeah.
like other entities to like it was like a whole thing to like try to set up a circle account to like try to perform
Yeah.
redemptions. But then luckily like the SVB got bailed out and
Yeah.
it was all fine. But I think it still was a big lesson, right? Because
Yeah.
it could have gone wrong. It could have gone that this money was stuck there. Like if there
Yeah.
was no bailouts, it likely would. And then you are stuck being, you as a holder of UCC, you're like a creditor to Circle, but they're a creditor like in the background to this other entity. And like I think eventually there would be a payout, but who knows how long these things would be,
Yeah.
stuck
That's
for, and what the things being stuck, like how big of a write-off you need to take on that.
yeah.
And so I think that's, even if Circle, like I think it's the best designed, like, like safest, probably stable coin like, like if you want to take the most conservative stablecoin route, I think that's like USDC. But even so, like it just shows you, I would say, the underlying risk that comes with all these like different designs. Like it's
Yeah.
not risk free, and to me, that's like one of the reasons why like we really need some way to like manage this risk, because the risk is there, and I think it's going to be very challenging to eliminate the risk completely. I think at some point, once we get really clear regulation and maybe a very standardized way of doing this, I think you will get to a point where maybe you have extremely minimal risk.
Yep.
But I think it's still like ways away
Yeah.
from us getting there. And like in the meantime, like, if we want the system to be truly resilient and to be able to really scale, and especially scale with all this like composable leverage and everything that's going on, like, I think we need to think about the black swan events and make sure that when the black swan events happen, like the system doesn't just like, the dominoes don't start falling.
Yeah. 100%. And well, I mean, for sure, Chapter 11 does not move at DeFi speed. So like that has to be there has to be another way to be able to like offset that risk. And even just being able to like get out of tokens at like a reasonable price because like obviously when USDC was depegging, a lot of that was commotion and fear in the markets versus like I think even if they did get actually trapped, it would have been like probably a haircut because they didn't have like a lot of money in SVB, if I remember. But still, it was like the commotion and the fear. And then if you have something like a Cork protocol that gives you a way to, just get out of it, step aside, like sidestep all the fear and the panic selling. And yeah, I mean, in the case of the V1, you're completely covered no matter what. And then in a V2, it sounds like, you might be able to even, as an LP, decide like, hey, these are the ranges at which I want to basically insure against. But I mean, you're totally right. There's all this risk in DeFi and in this like very immature financial market that's not even being tracked. It's not even like it's intangible until we get some kind of markets like this, which give us the ability to trade it. And then you just let the market price it. There doesn't have to be any kind of algorithm to figure out. You don't have to do like all these AI models and figure out like, oh, what's let's look at Tether's balance sheet and figure out like what are they actually holding and what does that look like. You can just let the market do it, and the market will, be as sophisticated as the actors with the most information, with the like the most up-to-date, low latency access to information. And it gives us a pinpoint. And now if you had something like a Terra Luna, you could see and you have this indicator that like, hey, a lot of people are saying that something's wrong here. Maybe this is something that people should be looking more into, instead of kind of like this discrete, bespoke like tweets that look like FUD but actually turn out to be like real signal. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
like the market fit and the need is absolutely there, and I think it goes even beyond just the folks who are, either providing cover or taking cover. It provides value in a way that we can now measure and like reference what does the market think about the risk on this thing, where like really that was not possible to measure before. So I think that's a really cool externality of something like this, even just having the market. But also it seems like it could be applied to other scenarios. So obviously we've got it for the DPEG risk, but there are other risks in DeFi that could be priced. Are you guys thinking about any of these other risk cases, like maybe like a smart contract security or something like this?
Yeah, so I mean, just looking back to what you said, like I think I completely agree with that, and like I think the all those people who are like sometimes just like funding certain things, like
Yeah,
I think it also gives like a way to just say like put your money where your mouth is, right?
yeah,
Like, if
absolutely.
you're like a Tether truther, like go and buy the like Deepak swaps for Tether and like, express your opinion and like,
Yeah,
I think that's like a fair thing for like people to like be able to do instead of just like expressing it, like expressing
yeah,
their frustrations on Twitter. But yeah, like going back to what you're saying with like different use cases, I think um, in particular with the V2, it should open up a fair bit of design space for like other things you can build with it. I would
hmm
say smart contract hacks are like, indirectly, like they're like if there's a smart contract hack on tied to a pegged asset, then like,
Yeah.
yes, we can cover that, but not, I would say, in the sense that you mean it, like where you can just cover any smart contract hack anywhere.
Yeah.
In the like new design, it would be if you have a way to basically like attest to a certain event happening on chain, you can like we'll be able to like program in a certain logic against that, and so that should open up like quite a lot of doors. For example,
Yep.
like there's been like attempts like in the past, for example, at like parametric like insurance for farmers, things like this.
Yep.
I think this could like potentially with the right market structure really work, where you say, okay, you have a feed of weather, and if there's certain extreme weather that happens, you have a certain payout. And I think that could be a better like model to do it than necessarily going through like the insurance company to like write the risk. So I do think there's some things like that that you can open up. And so if there is a data feed for it, I think you can do it. But I'm not sure with smart contract hacks if that's like maybe you have like a UMA protocol
Yeah. Yeah.
attesting to like was this protocol hacked, yes or
Yeah.
no, and
Basically.
maybe that could trigger a payout. But I think you would need to be creative with that. I think and I would say like just to speak to, I think there's a role for insurance that's just like a traditional insurance model. I would
Hmm.
say what we're doing is kind of more like the primitive is more like swaps.
Yeah.
And I think there's a role for both. I think there's a bigger role for like swaps in certain instruments, and there's a big role for insurance in certain instruments. I think if we look off chain as like an indicator of this, like there's a huge insurance market. And so I think, actors like Nexus, et cetera, that are building insurance products, I still think there's like a big need for that. Even if I think in certain markets, like if we take credit risk in particular, for example, I would say there you probably like, you want like a credit default swap. You don't want like some sort of
Yeah.
proxy insurance on that. I think, in particular, if we talk about composability, you want something that can like automatically get triggered and
Yeah.
automatically do
Not
payouts,
something that has to come
especially when
in.
you're moving at DeFi speeds.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I guess with that in mind, what is like the long-term goal for you guys? What do you see Cork being like? Let's say we played out, 5 years. What do you think Cork, who are the main users? Is it institutions who are like purchasing these swaps? Like what is the end goal for Cork here?
Yeah, I would say our kind of more long-term like goal is to accelerate the growth of like the on-chain, particularly the on-chain like credit market. We
Yep.
think there's a lot of credit that's going to flow on-chain. We think the future of credit markets is on-chain. And for that to really occur and to happen, you need sophisticated like infrastructure. I think those credit markets likely, if you look at it from like where is most capital sitting, I think it's likely going to be more on the institutional side. Like
Hmm.
I think short term, like we've seen, like there's a fair bit of like retail activity, like on chain, but even so, like there's a stat we got from like some people we're working with. I believe it's like 0.5% of the wallets hold around 98% of the capital.
Yeah.
So even like like there is a retail market today, but it's largely dominated by whales and by like institutions and funds. And like if you look off chain, like it's perhaps even more so, or like to a similar extent. And so I think largely credit markets are going to be like driven by institutions. And I think where we see this going is that eventually all these things probably get like regulated in some way, and this becomes part of like the regulated credit stack, and like all the hopefully it serves as like basically replacing the back end of what we have today with like mortgage-backed securities and all these like
Yep.
different like bond issuances. Hopefully all those things happen on chain in a more like transparent programmatic way that's like more efficient, like everything is just automated and like more fair. And as a part of that stack, you have basically like a risk stack on top of that is dealing with the risk management of that for all the participants that are involved. And that's kind of what we want Cork to be.
Yeah, I think, I mean, adding the aspect of everything being verifiable and on chain, like actually adds a lot of value to a product like this. Because, like, I mean, even thinking about like, oh, like in the Big Short, uh, when the price was actually trading in his favor, they wouldn't, the banks that he made the agreement with wouldn't even like pay him out because of, whatever excuse. That cannot happen with a protocol that's verifiable on chain, and how the the what is it called? The module. You can see how that the module is functioning and you know like it's immutable or you know maybe it's upgradable. I'm not sure what your architecture is, but ideally it's immutable and you know exactly you're going to get paid out. I think that adds a ton of value to a product like this in being able to trust your counterparty and well, not even really having to trust your counterparty at all. So yeah, I think that's a big value add there as well. And I think institutions, this is something very important for institutions coming in is being able to actually like underwrite the risk and understand the risks. And I think right now they're just playing around and like trying things out and building in the space and just kind of, you know, feeling it out. Have you guys been in any discussion? Have you talked to any institutions about some of this like risk underwriting and, you know, examining what the risk is on like some of these like staked ETH or something like this, derivatives?
Yeah, so I would say most of the liquidity provisions in our system currently are largely driven by institutions. I would say there are different categories of institutions. To date, we have been dealing mostly with the institutions that are more on-chain native because we're a new protocol. Like we launched like
Yeah.
maybe like 5 6 weeks ago. So there's a certain category of institution that's willing to like touch that type of product.
Yeah.
For most institutions, like even the crypto ones, like even the crypto native ones, many of them require you to be live for like 6 months with like 100 million TBL for them to even consider using you.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's probably the next bucket, like beyond this like initial phase of like the early adopters. And
Yeah.
then I would say like beyond that, and I think the more exciting longer term like view is like talking with more of the like really like large scale institutions. Like we've heard from some, for example, of the like ETF issuers and those types of actors
Hmm.
that they're interested in these types, like they're shopping around for these types of products. But like we haven't actively been like selling towards that audience yet because we just feel like it's maybe a little bit premature for
Yeah.
us given where we are right now in sort of the life cycle of the protocol. But ultimately, that's where we think this needs to go. Like we've
Yeah.
secondhand from like actors that are involved with us in various capacities and that serve that type of clientele. We've like secondhand heard like that there is clear interest and demand for this type of product. I think it's just really about proving it out and getting the coverage to the right price. Because there's
Yeah.
certainly a price that these actors are willing to hedge these products at. I think you just need the market to get there. And to get there, you need like certain levels of volume, you need certain like levels of liquidity, and you need certain levels of capital efficiency. And so we're just kind of working to figure all those things out and then,
Yeah.
basically like move that in that direction.
Yeah. And I love this product in the sense that now we're able to actually track it because another aspect of that is we actually need to get the industry to uphold a certain level of like security and certainty. Like if the risk of like a EtherFi you know, restake token depeg was like, oh, they're depegging like once a month, then it's like well, we have to fix that, and then we can like you know improve like the yield that you can get as an LP on this stuff. Um, so it gives us like a feedback loop for this. Like it actually lets us track stuff where otherwise this is like a very discrete phenomenon where like a USDC depegs or you know have you know what have you what kind of restaking token depegs. Now you can actually track it without just having some like arbitrary event happen and then looking at that individual event, you've like normalized it out and let the market trade on that. So I think it's important to be able to track this stuff. And I mean, really, there's a handful of things that are going to be really important to institutions, and this is absolutely one of them, is, you know, underwriting the risk of interacting with all these things because from what I've heard, they're very interested in being able to get DeFi access, or at least a subset of them are really interested in DeFi access. And I think they've got to, and they're going to bring a lot of the expertise and a lot of the work that has already been done in the traditional financial system and apply that on chain. And it's going to look a little bit different, but I think it's going to provide a lot of value. And the exciting part is that because it's DeFi, the work that's done there will be able to apply to everybody in DeFi because, you know, if you come up with some sort of risk assessment framework for smart contracts, that's like an institutional grade system that can be applied to assessing any arbitrary smart contract that you want to interact with, even if you're not an institution. So I think uh, that's a really exciting thing for even just the everyday DeFi user. And I think Cork plays a role there and helps us sort of underwrite this stuff. But yeah, and I mean, you guys, you're working on other stuff. You said you're working on a V2. What is like the biggest for you? What is the biggest bottleneck on your roadmap that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I think that's specifically solving this question of like capital efficiency and improving capital efficiency. I think
Yeah.
that's part of it. And I think there's one angle to it, which is the kind of core peg stability module, and then the second piece of it is the AMM.
Yep.
And I think kind of making I would think about this as like, we're in a completely new design space, and we kind of like, sort of invented this protocol based on like, we had a lot of different inspiration from different places, but ultimately it's like a new primitive. And I think with a lot of products, like the first version, like, I think we've gotten really good feedback on it. We're really excited about like what it's doing, how it's working and so forth. But we learned a huge amount throughout like building this and launching this. And I think the second version is probably going to be like, significantly more like effective in a lot of different ways and just allow you to do so many more things. Like the current version is like a subset of what you can do with the second version. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about that. And I think that's going to be just unlocking a lot of new use cases.
Yeah.
So, we're right now just focused on like with the V1, what we can we prove out, like what can we show and demonstrate. And then I think like V2 will, I would say, expand that quite significantly. But also just looking back to what you were saying before about like institutional side and like the need there for risk management, like Paradigm, I believe 1 or 2 weeks ago, they had this big report on
Hmm.
institutional adoption of DeFi, and it's really clear that like the vast majority of institutions are looking at DeFi, and they had this basically like survey they made of what were the like main blockers or barriers for them
Hmm.
to adopt DeFi. And the number one barrier was the regulatory, but we're seeing like really a lot of change there happening on the regulatory.
Yeah.
But the second biggest barrier was basically risk management.
Hmm.
And so I think as the regulatory side gets kind of like flipped, and like we can go from like regulatory uncertainty to regulatory clarity, I think the next kind of order of business is figuring out the risk management side.
Yep.
And so I think like that's report for me, like, like we kind of implicitly knew it, but I think it just kind of reinforces this idea that like this stuff really needs to be figured out for these types of institutions to really
Yep.
scale the market. And I really am quite excited about like the size that these institutions are talking about is like it's a different like scale than
Yeah.
what we're used to.
Yeah.
And I think the timing is quite good. Like I think if we can figure out capital efficiency
Yeah.
and at the same time like institutions are getting enabled to do this, I think we're
Yeah.
we're hopefully gonna be ready in like a year or so to welcome larger amounts of capital with open arms. And then I think you really see the whole ecosystem and like all the composability like will benefit from this because
Absolutely.
where are these things going to trade? Like it's going to be on probably like AMMs like Uniswap, etc.
Yep.
Like all these things are probably going to get collateralized. They're going to get collateralized on like Aave and Morpho, etc.
Yeah.
And like all these things are going to use all the rest of the stack. They're going to use Chainlink. They're going to use like Infura, etc. And so I think it's going to be extremely bullish for the entire space when like the floodgates they're open. And yeah, I'm really excited about kind of that next phase. And super bullish over like the next year. I think like from a fundamental perspective, like everything that's happening right now with price, I just think
Yeah.
it's
It doesn't
there's
matter.
so many
Yeah.
layers of validation. It's just like
Yeah.
crazy that price is so off sync with that.
Yeah. 100%. I think, and I mean, really the biggest benefit will be, for everyday DeFi users will be the market depth. Like I think market depth has been a big limitation on like all the strategies that you can like profitably like scale up, like all these, like you mentioned, you used to contribute to the index co-op. A big problem there is like market depth and figuring out how to rebalance the strategies in a way that like fits within that constraint as you start to scale the amount that you're managing. So yeah, I think institutions will completely turn that on its head. And it's funny because the DeFi like TVL, if you go to like DeFi Llama, it's been like it went up and then down, and then now it's up again a bit, but it's like it's been mostly flat over the last, like 4 years. If you take the 2021 peak around then and you compare it to now, it's like we're pretty much at the same spot. This is how we go parabolic, and we just go to like the next tier. I feel like we've hit the full surface area of people who are willing to like come and like open up their laptop and download MetaMask and like put in actual assets and play around with DeFi. And now we've got to go larger. And I think the institutions are best at like, I mean, obviously they're just on a next level of like go to market. How do we bring capital and allocate it to a certain sector? Um, so I think they'll really scale the market depth. And I think that's when DeFi gets like it almost becomes a compounding virtuous cycle, because once we scale the market depth, then it's like more institutions are going to come in and they want to take advantage of those that deep liquidity and those yields that you can get on larger sizes. Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's going to go through all these protocols. There's going to be fees that are charged based on the value that's provided for, swaps through Uniswap, or like borrowing on Aave or something like this, and that's all just going to get propagated through the entire DeFi ecosystem. So, I mean, yeah, we're really sitting on the precipice of potentially a really, really big acceleration for DeFi, and it's very exciting. And you guys are at a super exciting spot in that, solving one of the core issues to bring more institutions, more capital like this on chain. So, well, I mean, first of all, we're rooting for you. I hope you guys are able to solve this. And second of all, how do you guys track, like what kind of KPIs are you guys measuring and focusing on to be able to say like, hey, we want to get to this place in, X amount of time? Are there any KPIs, metrics you guys are tracking there?
Yeah, we're in particular we're looking at like notional coverage as one of our like North Star metrics.
Yeah.
So what we mean by that is basically the same like you have like notional, I think it's notional like open interests
Yeah.
on like perpdexes. It's like
Yep.
a similar metric for us where it's basically the amount that's being like hedged and covered by
Yep.
the protocol. And so for us, that's a reflection of people actually using it like for that type of demand. Like for us, of course, things like, liquidity and like TVL, like that's, matters as well. But
Yep.
it's sort of like a function of like that needs to be there and exist for us to actually have like enough market depth to achieve a certain level of like notional
Yep.
coverage. And then there's of course like volume. Like I think for us it's of course positive if there's volume across the markets, doing all the different like types of activities. And so yeah, those are the things we're tracking. We have like a doing dashboard for that, and we generally like are looking, or we're trying to optimize for like how we can expand the notional coverage and like figuring
Yep.
out like deals that will kind of get us there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting product where you have, kind of both sides that you've got to attract. You've got to attract the folks who want to sell coverage and the folks who want to buy it. What's the bottleneck there? Like how do you scale both at the same time? How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, exactly. It's really it's kind of like a marketplace that has those two sides, and you need to more or less bootstrap both.
Hmm.
So our thinking has been that initially we needed to bootstrap the supply side
Yep.
because you can't really have like
Yeah.
demand like the demand can't do anything unless we bootstrap the supply. So
Yeah.
we've done that. Like we have now like 16 like close to 70 million of liquidity, and so that's like for us sufficient to kind of satisfy like some of the initial demand. And now we're like looking at like how we can like scale up the demand and like bootstrapping more on that side. And so we're testing out like some different things on that. And like basically we're launching different markets, like testing out different types of integrations. We're really excited about in particular some like there's some integrations on both the demand and supply side that are pretty interesting. So one is like we can do a looping trade using the cover token, so the one that's
Yeah.
underwritten. So then you basically have like, like if you take one market that we have is SUSDE. So from Athena,
Yep.
it's underwriting tether risk. And so you're basically getting SUSD yield, but
Yep.
whilst underwriting tether. So it's like just a higher yielding Athena. And
That's
if you think
cool.
tether is like, it's fine, then,
Yeah.
that's fine. And so you can use that to do the same type of looping trade you would do with Athena, but you now get like a higher yield. So it should be like a higher kind of yielding looping trade.
Yeah.
So that's one, more on the like degen side of it. And then another one, which is like the degen, like safer degen side is, we have this thing called like the protected unit that we're about to roll out, which is like a bundle that's taking like a collateral, for example, Athena,
Mhm.
and hedges the Athena. So we have a market for Athena, we can hedge Athena. So you take those two combined, so you have basically hedged Athena, and it's like perpetually hedged. So it uses the yield to buy new coverage
Yeah.
whenever coverage runs out, and to use that as the collateral for looping trades. And so I think that's like a pretty interesting use case where you can basically have hedged looping trades, and then instead of like forcing, like a lot of these markets are hard coding the oracles to support looping trades, which for lenders is create certain risks. Like for
Yeah.
example, in the USDO plus plus DPEG, like we had these
Yeah.
like kind of a nasty situation where like people were like stuck with their collateral because the oracles were hard coded.
Yeah.
And so we think the better way to do this is that you have basically hedged collateral. And we think that could be a better market structure to like scale up looping trades. And so
Yeah.
that basically creates almost like a risk-free rate. And like I think it's going to be like these markets are all going to be like reactive to each other.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's another like market that we're really excited about rolling out soon. So do you think some of these like ways of integrating this will potentially bootstrap also the demand and supply? Because if you get like more people looping the cover tokens and people kind of looping the other side of it, the protection, you're kind of like leveraging lending markets to drive adoption on both those sides. That's leading to increasing both the supply and both the demand.
Yeah, and obviously another driver is just like what assets you can sell coverage for. Like I mean it's too bad that Luna collapsed when it did because if you had a Luna like this, I think that'd be a great like asset to list and you'd have really good like product market fit for people who are, want to speculate on the sustainability of the peg. Are there any assets like that for you guys that you are experiencing a lot of demand on or something you want to look to list?
What's the next Luna is what we're trying to find
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I feel like I can't like specifically comment on what I think is the next Luna, but I mean,
Yeah.
I would say for example, last week alone we had like two events where like I was like, damn, I wish we had like a market for those. So
Yeah.
one was the synthetics DPEG, that was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's still like SUSD from synthetics it's still DPEG'd quite meaningfully, like around 7%.
Yeah.
So I think like I don't want to compare that to Terra Luna, but it's like if there's any stablecoin that has a like using endogenous like collateral, like we're using it's just SNX that's backing the
Yeah.
stablecoin. I think that might be like directionally maybe
Yeah.
something like, but yeah, like where there's demand, I would say demand that's something we're kind of trying to figure out, and we have like certain answers for it. We have one market we're launching like very soon that we think is quite exciting. I don't want to like say it here, but um, we think in particular like yield bearing stablecoins, like stablecoins with like a relatively high yield that are taking on like novel forms of risk. I think stablecoins in particular is like something that there seems to be really a lot of traction for, and like if we were talking about like the DeFi TVLs and everything, like the one thing that's not flat is stablecoin TVL because
Yeah.
that's just like going up to the right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of excitement there around like stablecoins. And then there's like some, for example, like Bitcoin markets. Like there's a fair bit of actors who are like doing yield farming within the Bitcoin ecosystem, and a lot of that is also like quite new and novel.
Mhm.
And it's like similar to I think if we were live when the like eigen points farming was going on
Yeah.
and was at its peak, I think this would have been a really great fit for that. I think we have
Absolutely.
something similar going on now with like Bitcoin, with like Babylon and that whole ecosystem, and so I think that's another angle which we think is pretty exciting. But yeah, I think we have to be responsive to where the market goes and like what's happening in the market. I think there's probably going to be interesting markets that are coming up, and like as we hear people wanting coverage for different things, like we'll start listing those. But yeah, those are some of the angles that we think are pretty interesting near term.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of interesting, and it's hard. It's also hard to predict what the next event will be and then, get the market up ahead of time. It's always going to be like looking back, like, oh, of course, I wish we had a market for this. But eventually you'll just have everything. And and it's good to have the underlying infrastructure that is, flexible enough to be able to list tons of different types of assets, as long as it's like compatible with like an ERC20 standard, then, presumably, of course, if there's no like rebasing or weird stuff like this, presumably it would be easy to support under the same peg stability module. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of time of getting the largest support. And then, once you have a certain amount of tokens listed, there's going to be events happening across, whether it be 1% chance, 50 basis points percent chance, like there's going to be a lot of actual value brought by Cork. And in terms of, okay, so we've gotten all of these different tokens listed. And is this essentially, are you guys shooting to have a lot of tokens, or are you seeing yourself more long term as like focusing in on a select few and then just scaling the amount of liquidity that can be sold or cover that can be sold for those? What do you think is like the winning play here? Just going wide or going very deep on a couple?
Yeah, I think that's something which we're ourselves trying to figure out, and I think as the market evolves, like we'll
Yeah.
see where that goes. Because I think on the one hand, you have some kind of like economies of scale where
Yeah.
certain types of markets and certain types of like behavior and types of hedging, you need fairly deep liquidity.
Yeah.
And like, we've heard like through many of our partners, like, people who want coverage for like $50 million or $100 million, and we just can't satisfy that right now. And for us to satisfy that, we need fairly large markets. And I think I would guess that the majority of our TVL is going to sit with those large markets. At the same time, I think what crypto uniquely enables you to do is that we can, create these smart contract factories, and you can just spin up markets and it costs almost nothing.
Yeah.
Off chain, it costs like, around 100K or so to create a contract for like a credit default swap, because you have these like
Yeah.
massive stacks of paper that needs to go through a legal team and everything. And so, you just want to have access to that, and you're paying a huge amount of money. And so
Hmm.
that's only viable for a very narrow audience, for a narrow set of instruments where you're dealing with like large sizes. But with crypto, we can spin these things up. Like if it's on a layer two, it will cost like literally like cents. On
Yeah.
layer one, like nowadays it's just even so it's just like a few dollars to spin up these markets. And so I think it's a pretty good fit for the long tail as well. And I think you can create like coverage for like the long tail, like,
Yeah.
quite well. And some of these like trades might not even be like, on an AMM. It might just be OTC, where you say,
Yeah.
you have this as infrastructure, and if two counterparties can meet to come up at a price where they want, like one wants to provide coverage, one wants to like, buy the coverage, you could do this through like something like a RFQ, like a request for quote
Yeah.
system. I think you can pretty easily support like a long tail and do really like customized like products there as well. And so I think in particular when you're looking at, for example, like credit, like you have a lot of like we have a long tail of like credit
Yeah.
that's currently like uncovered, and I think we can probably open up and enable products for that. So I think it's probably going to be a bit of both. I would guess majority is on the like fat tail, and
Yeah.
then but I think this can be quite effective for the long tail as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, when there's like very little overhead to support that, you might as well, be able to open it up and ideally let anybody spin up their own market. And the beauty of that is anybody can come and provide cover for it if they like the underlying risk. Um, yeah, and I mean, is there anything in the next couple of weeks that you guys are going to be pushing out that maybe folks should be aware of? Maybe they should go check out. Obviously, you guys just recently launched. Is there anything related to that?
Yeah, I mean, we have some exciting new markets that are coming live.
Yeah,
So be on the lookout for that. So that's something which we're working on getting out now. And then we have this like protected unit that's going to come live. Like we've already like built it. It's like live on testnet and everything. It's just
yeah,
we're waiting to launch it, and we're gonna announced some really interesting integrations with that. I think that's going to be I think for DeFi, it's going to be like when we're talking about this like experimentation and like learning, the shared learning. I think this is like fundamentally a new type of way of doing looping trade and like a new take on it. And I think that's we'll see how it goes, but
Yeah.
I think that has the potential to really be like an important building block. And
Yeah.
I hope it becomes like a more resilient way to
Yeah.
scale up looping trades.
Yeah.
That's kind of our aspiration. And so I would really be on the lookout for that because I think that's going to be really a
Yep.
very novel like experiment.
Yeah, much easier to delever and sort of get out of these positions and yeah, and addresses those like uh those those risky edge cases that you can get into where you have like a unexitable position and stuff like this and just makes it a lot simpler. I think making the UX of this stuff a lot simpler is going to accelerate. It's only going to accelerate the rate at which we can implement new strategies, compose new integrations and stuff like this. So yeah, that's incredibly cool. I can't wait to see what the results are of that going live. And I'll be checking it out myself for sure to see because I'm interested to see like how it's implemented, what it looks like, and all this stuff. So we'll be definitely digging in. So we'll have the link to you guys' website below, Twitter as well. So if folks want to go and check out some of these new cover products, and then also what you guys are going to be launching in the next couple of weeks here, head on over to the website and check it out. Is there anything else we can push folks towards?
I think that's the main thing. Yeah.
Perfect.
Follow us on Twitter and if you want to check out the app, we also have that. You can, provide liquidity to the system or take out coverage. We have a few markets live, like for Lido, ETHFI, Tether, and Athena. So if you're holding any of those tokens or you want to bet
Yeah.
against them or underwrite the risk, there's
Yeah.
opportunities on both sides. So happy to for anyone to check that out.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you hopping on and discussing core protocol and all the cool things you guys are working on. I learned a lot about what you guys are building, even just in this last hour. So much appreciated to walk through some of this cool stuff with us. And yeah, dude, it was a pleasure.